All right, welcome to the Armchair Commanders podcast. My name is John,
And I'm Jack.
and this week we are reviewing the classic film of All Quiet on the Western Front. This is 1930,
30.
right? Yeah,
Exactly 1930.
the 1930 variant. Uh, I don't know about you, but this was actually so I had read the book and I had seen the 70s version and the Netflix version, and I had seen all of the I seen most of the clips from this film, but this is the first time I've actually watched it start to finish. How about you?
I have watched it from start to finish before. There's a story about that. So, back in fall of 2017, I was back in college at USD full time, and I decided to branch out a bit. And the club I joined was the games club at USD, like board games and stuff.
Right.
One of the games that I almost immediately got drafted to play was Weird War One. It's an RPG that takes place during World War One. However, there's a bunch of freaky shit that happens, like supernatural shit or super science shit. And admittedly, I admitted I didn't know much about World War One. So I thought after coming home, I decided to, on a whim, just put that movie on so I could get more of a sense of what I was getting into. And not only that, but I was playing a combat engineer or a sapper. So I not only played that movie, but I also watched The Hurt Locker in the same night. And those movies blend together in a very disturbing manner.
Well, I'm sure.
But to this day, All Quiet on the Western Front, the 1930 version, is still one of the best war movies I've ever seen. It's one of those movies that sticks with you.
Absolutely. I This film has definitely stuck with me. I was a huge fan of the other two variants of this film, and the book was probably one of my top five books that I've ever read. Um, yeah, it's easily one of my top five, favorites. But I guess to start off how we normally do, what'd you think about it on this watch through?
I still liked it. I still consider that one of the greatest war movies I've ever watched. I was telling you before we started this that I'm glad we watched this again because there's some things that I had forgotten about completely, and more so on that later. But I was tempted to just confession time. I was tempted to just straight up not watch this one because of how much of it stuck with me. But I made the decision to take the time today to sit down and actually watch it again, and I'm really glad I did because it is a fantastic movie. And yeah, and I watched the 70s version and the Netflix version. I wasn't huge on the 70s version. The Netflix version was good, but I feel it had its own problems. So altogether, I'd have to go with the 1930 version being the best version, in my opinion. However, the one problem I have with the 1930 version is that there's nothing about gas throughout the entire movie when that was such a huge part of World War One. And I'm beginning to wonder if there was a deleted scene or two where they talked about it, or maybe it was involved in it or something, but they just never talk about it. Is that because it
Yeah,
was hard, or
I'm sure it probably was. And the thing is that, for a film from 1930, there's a lot of stuff in here that they accomplished that I was honestly kind of impressed by. Like the number of night scenes that we get in this movie for a 1930s black and white film is really kind of impressive. And the fact that
oh yeah,
they're done very well, where, I think there's only one time where it's very obvious it's like a darkened stage or set and they have like a spotlight, but pretty much
yeah,
every other scene it almost seems natural, which I think is a huge accomplishment with camera technology at the time.
Oh, absolutely. Night scenes are hard.
Well, I mean, they're hard even by today's
Oh
standards.
yeah.
Um, so I will say though, even though I was impressed by the night scenes, this is still a very 1930s film. It's got for anybody who hasn't spent a lot of time watching older films from like the 30s and 40s, this film definitely fits the mold of how they generally would shoot scenes and kind of, camera angles and all that stuff. But there's something about this film, like, and I only really noticed it during uh the first major like battle scene, when you have the French jumping the trench. And I don't know if it was like the frame rate, or I don't know what it is, but it almost feels as though it was like sped up a little bit in
Yeah.
places.
It was, and I don't remember the reasoning behind that.
So I will say that was a little funky, but like the battle scenes in this film, even for being like a very like you can very obviously tell it's a heavily choreographed, like the hand to hand fighting scenes are very choreographed, and it's very like, you know I'm sticking a sword in your armpit type deal. um I still thought they were great, especially during that same scene that we see the French taking over the trench. We get the back and forth image of the one machine gun and trench emplacement, where we see it from the German side, and then like it flips around and we get it from the French soldiers' side, and then it flips back to the German side and we see them open up and just basically like cutting them down in swaths. And I thought that was a very uh, well done moment in that overall scene.
Yeah.
That was also that scene. So you're familiar with the infamous hands on barbed wire image, right?
Oh yeah.
It's usually it's the like there's one frame that is like the most famous image in this entire movie that's often associated with this film. And oftentimes like it'll be like posters and stuff like that. Like this movie, if you were to sum it up with one image, it is the image of two hands, and it's just the hands, and they got like bloody stumps on them, and they're
Mm-hmm.
gripping a set of barbed wire. Like I was looking for it, and I knew it was coming up, but even with the knowledge of it going to be coming up and me specifically looking for it, it still completely caught me off guard. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a true testament to how powerful that one moment is. And also, I forgot, or I didn't realize, like, because I've seen the scene before, but it is a scene that if you blink you will literally miss it, because
It's quick.
it's yeah, it's like 2 or 3 seconds out of this entire film, but it is probably one of the most like it's probably the one moment in this film, if nothing else sticks with you, that moment will.
Mm-hmm. But did you hear the creation of that scene?
No, I didn't.
So he put out a casting call in Los Angeles in like the late 20s when they were first filming
For like the
for
first hand models, or
extras, and preferably German speaking or preferably World War I veterans. And he was surprised when over 1,000 German veterans showed up. And he would like listen to the stories they would tell him. And that was one of the stories, how when the soldiers, or when a French assault happened, a French soldier grabbed onto the barbed wire they set up, and a grenade went off at that French soldier's feet, and the his hands were still hanging on the barbed wire. So yeah,
Uh,
just the fact that the stories the veterans told him influenced how the movie turned out is, in my opinion, very special, and it really puts the a new spin on this movie.
I think that says a lot when a director is willing to incorporate input like that. Because that shows that you have a director or you have a casting crew who is more focused about doing a story right than they are about anything else. It's not so much the like quote unquote artistic nature of the film. It's like we're just going to do this right, and I think that shows it.
Yeah, man. And another thing that I'd forgotten was in this movie entirely was that brief subplot about the boots. It was
Yeah,
Kemmerich's
that
boots.
that was I really like that because it didn't really veer you off of the main story too much, but it's still like it was a great addition. You know, because obviously there's so much foreshadowing that is done about these boots that when he finally loses his leg and then ultimately dies, um, you know, that in and of itself is a powerful moment, and like him giving the boots to his other squad mate and then he dies. If the film had left it at even just that, it still would have been a great moment or a great series of events in this movie. But the fact that they took the time to add like 2 extra minutes of just random people
Yeah,
having the same set of boots and basically implying that they're cursed was
yeah,
a great addition.
yeah. The curse of Kemmerich's boots. And I just have to assume that that's like an old soldier's superstition that if you take the boots off of a dead man, you'll join him.
Maybe, but also, I mean, there's a lot of anecdotes through multiple wars of taking boots off of dead people because,
Yeah, because boots are expensive.
well, yeah, and they wear out very quickly in those environments. So, I mean, there's so many different stories of like the American Revolution and the Civil War where you have guys who are literally marching barefoot because of a lack of shoes. We also saw that in the Alamo, where one of the scenes they had in that film was they focused in on Santa Anna's troops, and you could see them marching with like rags on their feet through a mountain pass.
Yeah,
But I thought there was a lot of good performances. I will say that the the influence of the was it the mid Atlantic or the transatlantic.
Yeah, the transatlantic accents. And I was gonna bring that up too. It's a
You
very
see here, boys.
it really really it takes you out of the movie. You see when all of these boys from Germany are speaking like they're from the eastern United States. But yes, what can you do?
I'd do anything for him. Yeah,
Well, you better believe I'd do anything for him. But
he was our
yes,
postmaster just yesterday. That
and
is
I
something
I
that
actually
was
forgot. Yeah,
that is something I did like is um this movie is a pretty faithful adaptation of the book, and I really appreciated the like boot camp training scene with Himmelstoss and how he's been in the arm or he was in the reserves, but he's technically been in the army for all of like a week longer than these guys, and he's walking around like, if you want to live, you have to do what I say. Like it's like
yeah,
fuck off, Himmelstoss.
yeah, and he has this inflated ego because he outranks them, and he like makes them march and march and march and crawl through the mud. Like, okay, yeah, they're gonna do a lot of marching, but do you know anything else that you can have them learn, or no? Is that it?
Nope, that's it.
That's it, just
It's the
marching.
only
All
thing
right,
you need to know is marching.
yeah, but On the other side of things, there's really no way to prepare them for trench warfare. I don't think no one was prepared for that during that war.
It's also one of those things that it's very difficult to comprehend or understand. Like obviously we don't have the firsthand experience of it, but we have an idea of it just because of the accounts and the media portrayals that we have available to us. But I think like a great example of it is the scene where Paul goes home on leave and he has uh, dinner with his old teacher, who is like, you see, you just gotta knock off this trench warfare nonsense and just push on through the Paris. And he's like,
That's how we stay safe.
he's like, it's different up there.
Yeah,
And this teacher has the balls to say, you just don't get the big picture. It's like,
that was
fuck,
his. That was
fuck
his.
off.
That was his dad's friends when they're at the bar. Like, oh, my son is at the front, and he's like, oh, you guys just need to push on to Paris, and he's like, motherfucker, I was there. And then that dickhead is like, oh, you just don't understand. He was there. And then, like, while they're arguing, like, no, we should push through Flanders. It's a flat field. Like, oh, we should just push straight to Paris. It's a straight shot. And then he just gets up and leaves.
Right.
Because, like, what else can you? You can't argue with these guys.
Well, he gets that same kind of treatment when he is like visiting his old school. And mind you, like his teacher is so wrapped up in the like
Romance of
Kaiserland
war.
the Kaiserland fuck yeah mentality
Yeah.
instead of America fuck yeah.
Yeah, I see what you did there.
Yeah, I know I'm clever like that. But I thought that was a great opening to the movie, and then to actually revisit it was pretty good
You
too.
have a complete different context at that point.
Yeah, because well, even in the beginning, us as a viewer, when the teacher is like, he's like, I can't tell you what to do, but also you're a bunch of pussies if you don't, you know?
Yeah, he like
Huh,
guilt,
Paul? What about you?
straight up guilts them.
Yeah, and it's easy for him because he doesn't have to face the consequences or the ramifications of that particular decision. He gets to sit there and he's like, I'm a proud patriot that got these boys to sign up, but he never had to take any of the risks.
Nope. Because why would he? And yeah, it really sells it because, like, yeah, they're 18 or 19 in this, right, at the beginning, but they look their age. And I think they made it a point at that scene towards the end when he comes home to make the students look even younger than they probably actually were. And that
Yeah,
really just sells it.
yeah. Speaking of age, something that didn't age well in this, um, was do you remember the scene where they are all at a bar together and they see a poster of I think it was like a fashion poster or something like that,
It
but
was a singer.
okay. Anyways, there's a poster of a female and a dude, and they like rip the poster in half so there's only the female on the wall. And then they kind of just they start talking and it's like imposing their like what is their dream girl on like this image. And one of the questions they ask themselves are like, how old do you think she is? And one of them's like 22 and the other guy's like, well, that would make her older than us. That's no good.
He's
and
like, what about
and
17?
yeah, I'm like, holy shit. Like now
Yeah.
mind you, if they are 18, like I think anybody today would be like, yeah, a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old dating each other is like that's a
Whatever.
normal yeah, that's the equivalent of two high schoolers dating each other, right?
Yeah.
But just the way that they said it, it just came off super creepy where it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, if only she was 17, like Jesus Christ, guys. Like
And there's another part where their other compatriot Yadin comes up and he's like, I like him a bit thicker in the middle or something. And they're like, way to ruin it, Yadin.
way to go, Tjod.
And they
Yadin
I
or
think
Tjodin?
T Jaden, so I have to assume it's Yadin. The T is silent. I don't know. I think they say Yadin, but
Yeah.
but
Oh,
yeah, Paul's
way to
like
ruin
we
it
were
with your own
noble.
way to
Yeah,
ruin it with your own preferences.
Paul even said we were noble up until you said that. Were you? You were just talking about if she was 17. Golly.
Well, that's the other thing is they obviously, like I said, this is a faithful adaptation of the book where pretty much most of the scenes that are in the book makes its way into this movie. One scene though that I was honestly I I still don't know how I 100% feel about it, but there's a scene there's a part of the story in the book that got translated to one of these scenes, which is they're all bathing and there's a couple of French women who are walking along and basically they start catcalling them. And essentially they initially are rejected because, they're being dickheads.
Yeah.
Um but then it's like, look, we have a loaf of bread, and then suddenly it's like,
Yeah,
come
the
over to
sausage.
it's like, come over tonight and we'll suck your dicks. And it's like, what?
Man, life used to be a lot easier back then, let me tell you what.
Well, I was like watching that scene and then remembering like how like the way it was written in the book, like it was still like a problematic deal, but the way it was written in the book made it much more like it was much well more understood that like everybody at this point in time is starving. So like yeah, it would make sense that anybody would do just about anything for food at this point. But that wasn't established in this film. Like it's literally just these girls who are walking along the riverbank with zero context beforehand, and it's just like, look, we have a loaf of pumpernickel, and then suddenly it's like, come on over. It's that is one scene I think that they could have done better or tried to set up in a different way, because honestly, if you're only watching this film and you see the scene, especially with a modern lens, you're going to be like, what in the fuck is this?
Yeah. And I think they kind of do mention the whole dire straits for food earlier, or at least imply it with how hungry the soldiers are at the time.
But that makes more sense as like a frontline soldier, because obviously like on the front line of a battlefield, you're going to be facing a lot of hardships, and like food insecurity is a reasonable one. But if we're literally looking at a scene before that where they're at a bar just having a grand old time and a big party, basically, we don't get that impression in like the civilian life of things, especially like when Paul takes his trip home, and his mom's like, make sure you don't burn the potato pancakes and get the blackberry jam down. It like we don't really see the hardship or the want in the civilian side of this.
Don't Paul's dad and his friends mention how's the food at the front's got to be better than what we have? Is it though?
Eh,
Because
I
this is
don't get me
back at
wrong. Like they definitely were rationing, but
yeah, this is back in the time. Well, even in America, there was meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays or whatever, where you would just go without so the boys at the front could eat.
that's actually kind of an interesting anecdote, because obviously there was so we did rationing in both World War II and World War One.
Uh-huh.
And for Americans, they did all of. There came a point in the American involvement in World War One where they were doing rationing, where America really didn't need to. Like we had more than enough, but they could like the government still continued to push rationing in order to keep the American public kind of cohesive in this, you know, conflict.
Hmm.
Because it's like, okay, we're all chipping in and sacrificing something type deal. World War II is different. That was at least the front half of the war. The rationing was much more necessary. I mean, so much so that during World War II they changed pennies over from being copper to steel because
Mostly zinc.
Yeah, but I mean the exterior coating of them
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
changed over to steel because they needed the copper for other things.
Yeah, and people were encouraged to grow victory gardens. Kind of a tacky name, but I get the spirit.
So if your victory garden dies, does that mean that we're going to lose the war?
That means the Kaiser wins. The Kaiser. But only tangentially related, but remember that play I was in last year, the Radium Girls?
Yeah.
At the beginning, the titular Radium Girls decide to pull a prank where they paint their faces with radium and turn off the lights in the factory, wait for the supervisor to come on the floor, and then pop out from behind the desk and scare her. But she's also with the CEO of said company. So they're like, oh shit, we're going to get in trouble. And the CEO gives them a chin wagon. Like, whenever every time you girls screw around, you're playing right into the hands of the Kaiser. Oh man, propaganda used to make itself practically.
Yeah, back in the day, propaganda actually could make you feel somewhat guilty too. Like,
Don't let this mad brute win.
better dead than red.
If I were a boy, I'd join the Navy.
Oh, the I gotta say, World War II and World War One had some stellar recruiting campaigns.
Yeah, yeah. But
Bye bye
get
and buy bonds.
what is a war bond, anyways? Is it money you basically bet on your side?
Kind of. So a war bond works the same way that any other bond does, which is you put in X amount of dollars, and then after a set time, you get that money back plus interest. And the government essentially used them to uh, pay for war because World
Yeah,
War One and World War Two were very expensive. I think they did war bonds during Korea too. Um, but yeah, it was just a fundraising thing. World War Two was real big on war bonds. A lot of times they would get Medal of Honor recipients
yeah.
to,
Basilion.
yeah, him. The flag raisers of Iwo Jima did a really big one. Just literally anything worth uh, bragging about, they would do it to get war bonds.
But
So
yeah, I remember this on the top, kind of on the topic of propaganda. But the Daff, I remember watching a Daffy Duck cartoon where he gets his paycheck from working at the factory, and the devil duck like guides him towards this casino and hookers and whatnot. He's like, come on, treat yourself, you work hard. And then the good angel duck like guides him. Is like, you ought to buy some war bonds with that money, son. Have you forgotten our fighting boys overseas? Eh, that's why I always buy war bonds at every paycheck I get.
that way you don't go to hell.
Yeah, let's see. You know, Scrooge McDuck was surprisingly absent from that. I wonder what he did with his money.
We see he sold the war bonds. That's where.
Yeah, he owned it. We don't talk about his involvement in the war.
Well, you see, he paid for somebody to take his place in the draft.
Yeah,
Oh wait, that was a civil war. Never mind.
but getting back to the movie, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I missed. But the brief training scene where, like I said, they don't do much other than march, crawl through the muck, and then beat the shit out of their drill sergeant.
That was kind of a weird. That was
It
another one of
was.
those moments, like them beating up their sergeant. I get it because their sergeant was a dick in this movie. It's just that was another moment in the filmmaking of this where I was like, okay, it shows the period it was made because like they show them whipping him with canes, but you can very obviously tell they're not making contact with him. So
And that, yeah, that's another thing when they're in the little bunker. presumably in the first couple weeks when they're just getting used to being bombarded every night, and that dude wigs out, and Cat like tells Paul, hold him, and he like very obviously fake decks him across the face, and he still reacts to it. And Cat's like, well, why'd you do that? And Cat doesn't even answer, just hold him still, and then he punches him out and then knocks him out this time. And just the how shittily delivered the fake punches were just got me.
I will say it was very interesting to, they didn't shy away from showing shell shock, but the way that they portrayed shell shock, um, it's like if you YouTube shell shock, it's weird how much different. I mean, shell shock is just PTSD by another name, but
Yes.
I find it very interesting how different generations in different environments produce different reactions to it, because obviously, like, we live in a time and in a generation where there's a huge population with PTSD from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the way that those individuals present PTSD, um, is vastly different than the way we see World War I soldiers present PTSD. Because the shell shock version of this is very like the like rocking back and forth, screaming type deal, kind of fidgeting, jitters, that type of deal. Versus like PTSD today is more depression based and like kind of like panic attack based, but like we don't see people today having breakdowns. Well, I mean, there are people that have breakdowns like that, but just not in the same numbers as we see in the World War I fashion. So that was just an interesting thing to see in this film, was the portrayal of PTSD slash shell shock. And I find it also interesting, kind of like when you transition to like World War II films, because they went away from shell shock in World War II and just started calling it battle fatigue. And whenever we see battle fatigue in World War II films, it's always, even in like Band of Brothers, it's like a dude just lying on the
Thousand
cot,
yard
like,
stare.
yes, thousand yard stare, they're lying on the cot, just being unresponsive, which is also different from how PTSD presents most of the time in today's climate. So even though it's quote unquote, I mean, it is the same thing. It's just, it's a very interesting thing to see how it presents through different generations.
Yeah, and it's also like the nature of how their wars were fought. The part of the reason why the Vietnam vets had such a prevalent rate of PTSD is because World War II guys on average faced about 40 or so days of combat a year, where it's estimated Vietnam veterans had 240 days of combat a year. And it wasn't just face the enemy and take this hill, it was like psychological. They could come bursting out of the jungle at any second, or the next step I take could be the last. And in World War I, you see it's just chill in a trench, get shelled, hope you don't die,
I don't
maybe
know if
go
it's
up and
necessarily,
over.
I don't know if it's necessarily chilling, but
You know what I meant.
yeah.
Like
No,
stay
there's
in a
like even being on the front line doesn't necessarily equate to like combat in a sense. Like you're exposed to gunfire and shelling and all that stuff, but you know, day to day you're not like exposed to massive attacks. It's not
yeah.
like World War II where you're advancing through a country, or Vietnam where, you're going through the jungles, essentially waiting for an ambush or something, or, Iraq rolling down the road and, an IED can go off anytime.
Yeah.
World War I's much, it was different, where it's like, yep, we're sitting and waiting here, and, there might be a shell with your name on it. Same kind of waiting and uncertainty for disaster, except you're just stationary.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly a vast psychological effect.
Speaking of psychological effects, what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a bottle of Mickey's.
Mickey's.
Yeah,
I didn't know they still made those.
yeah, puzzle in the inside of every cap.
Is it like one of those like big bottles from like a convenience store type deal?
What?
Is it like one of those big bottles from the convenience store type
Oh
deal?
no, it's from a 6 pack, a six a mix, as me and my friends call it.
Oh, I didn't know if you got yourself like a 40 or something.
Oh no, 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 no! I don't like 40s of mix. Just kind of like, why get a 40 when you can get a bunch of sixes for that many more puzzles?
You're
Because
just in it for the puzzle.
hey, the puzzle's like one of the best parts.
I get it. It's like a Kinder egg, you know?
Kinder egg for adults. I remember used to go out on the boat with my dad, and I'd be drinking like, I don't know, Mountain Dew or a Coke, and he'd be having a Mickey's, and he would always, uncap the Mickey's, look at the cap, and then he'd hand it over to me to solve. Fun childhood memory I have.
I remember when I was a kid, we generally didn't get Coca-Cola because poor kid problems. So we usually drank at the time RC Cola or Royal Cola, if you will, was cheaper. So we usually
Mm-hmm.
got RC Cola. And as a kid, my dad always, what he would do is, on a regular 12-ounce can, what he would do is he would just push in a dent on the side. And that would denote that that was his can of soda. And as a kid, I was like, okay, whatever. Like that's dad's can of soda. And then just like one day when I was like 6 or 7, I was being a lazy piece of shit, and I like because we didn't keep soda like in the actual like house fridge. We had like one of those college dormitory mini fridges out in the garage that we kept our sodas. And I was like I said, I was being a lazy piece of shit, and I was like, I don't want to go outside, so I just like went to the kitchen where my dad's soda was, and I took a drink from it. And it was at that point that I realized that my dad liked mixing Crown Royal with his RC Cola, and I figured out why the fuck he made such a big deal about me not drinking from his soda anymore. So John's first whiskey.
I'm telling Jerry.
I'm pretty sure he knew too because I didn't have a great reaction to it at the time.
I'm telling on you. Good old childhood memories.
Right.
But one of the things I was gonna bring up
Oh, I was going
is
before you
oh,
get
go
to
ahead.
that, I was going to say my drink of choice for tonight, who is also not our sponsor, unless you got us a Mickey
But could be.
sponsor. I was going to say our not sponsor tonight is Heineken. So Prost.
Prost. God damn it. Oh yeah. The thing I was gonna bring up is when he gets home, he kisses his sister and mother on the mouth. Just
Different time, man.
like different. Is it a cultural thing? Do Germans do that?
I don't. I'm not going to speak to the German culture, but it wouldn't surprise me if in Europe at that time that was a thing. Just
I mean,
because,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
But yes, I also noted that and was like, oh, that's kind of weird.
man. The trenches fuck with a guy.
Just 1 week in the trenches, and all of a sudden you're into cousin loving.
Yep. Hate to see it happen.
What are you doing, Step Kaiser?
Oh God. Step Kaiser, I'm stuck in the trench.
Oh, Wilhelm.
God. Good Lord. But yeah, the aforementioned dickhead postman turned drill sergeant turned casualty of war that dies in his first outing.
Have you ever rooted for a death more than that?
I'm pretty sure, but I can't remember when. And he didn't even get a ceremonious death. He just like bomb go off, fall over.
It's kind of like when we were watching Gettysburg. I'm like, man, I hope Pickett's charge fails.
And you were somehow surprised. Who could have seen
What?
this coming?
I don't know. Maybe this time they turn it around.
Yeah, maybe we're watching like the alternate universe Pickett's charge.
It's like that one episode of South Park where they all pretend to be Civil War reenactors,
Yeah,
and
the red badge of gayness.
yeah, and Cartman's like, "Why do we have to lose?" And then in the middle of the reenactment, he just flips the script. Is like, "I want to win." And it's like, "You can't do that."
He gets them all drunk off of s'mores schnapps.
Oh, how I really hate you guys.
You just don't respect my authority. And Butters is the messenger.
I'm tempted. We should do Red Badge of Gayness as a bonus reel sometime.
We should. But also, I wanted to briefly mention the screams in this movie. I'm
Go
convinced.
on.
I'm convinced they actually recorded from the battlefield some of these screams. Like, man, the actors really nailed it with some of the screams. I'm convinced that dude was actually insane.
You know what was an interesting part of this is the scene in the crater where Paul kills the French soldier.
Yeah.
And you know how that French soldier never says anything?
Nope.
Well, the French soldier never says anything. Apparently, the dude who plays that French soldier, I forget his name, but he was like a huge silent film star.
Really?
He had he got some sort of disease as a kid that basically destroyed his vocal cords. And All Quiet on the Western Front was his last film credit because this was at the time where silent films were, basically going out the window because of, the recording technology. So, All Quiet on the Western Front, not only is it does he play a character who dies, but it's also the quote unquote death of his movie career.
Raymond Griffith.
Yeah.
And yeah, what I'm reading right now says that that's on the money, like the advent of the talkies.
It's like that one episode from Family Guy where they made fun of the silent film star who had just like a messed up voice and couldn't continue.
It was the old stone face. I can't remember his name. Stone face actor. Buster Keaton. Apparently, yeah, he had
Yeah.
a really weird voice.
I think we have a Buster Keaton film on our list.
Goodness.
It's Great Locomotive Chase. But I digress. So yes, we actually have two silent films on our list right now. So
Really
yeah, so Great Locomotive Chase and Battleship Potemkin.
interesting.
Battleship Potemkin is actually an interesting study. So obviously, you took film appreciation in school,
I
right?
did.
Yeah. So at our school, um, one of the requirements of the degree is you had to have one art class under your belt. Um, I took two of them. I took photography and I took art appreciation, but there was also, or not art appreciation, film appreciation. But you could also do like intro to drawing or like there's a really popular one was rock and roll appreciation. I don't know if you took that, but
No, I didn't.
I think Miranda took both rock and roll appreciation and film appreciation.
I
Anyways,
was more of a film guy.
anyways, we I took film appreciation in college, and one of the first things you discuss is uh, Birth of a Nation, which is obviously a Klan movie.
Yeah, it's something.
Well, with the recent kind of change in attitudes about such materials, where it's like, yeah, even though we understand the historical importance of this film, a lot of schools have actually started to stray away from they'll discuss it, but they don't show it anymore. And Battleship Potemkin has now kind of taken the place of Birth of a Nation in a lot of film studies classes as like a super early example of film.
Hmm. Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it little tidbit of the day.
Good to know.
Now I won't be able to talk about that whenever we review it, but
Yeah, you really made your own bet on that one, John.
oh well. So what was
Um,
your favorite scene in this entire film?
I need to think on that. Like the frame rate issue and the pacing issue with the battle itself is definitely a problem. But but for the time, that was a solid battle scene, especially since how it showed how a creeping barrage worked.
Right.
I do like that.
No, that battle was a great scene, and especially because it led into the crater scene as well.
Hmm. Huh.
I, I think my favorite scene um is probably, we already discussed it, was the shell shock scene in the bunker was probably my favorite. Just because it really gave me something to think about.
Yeah, and that's how a good chunk of the war was like, just sitting around waiting for the attack and just enduring the shelling, trying not to get buried alive.
Right.
Had to have been maddening.
You know, the thing that really shocked me about this film is this is right at the beginning of the Hays Code era. And I was reading, apparently the Hays Code didn't really get like super strictly enforced until a few years after this film.
Hmm.
But Paramount, I think it was Paramount that produced this film, which for Paramount to produce this film at the time they did, because they made the decision to produce this film like very shortly after the stock market crash. And at the time it was a super expensive film. So
Hmm.
they gambled heavily on this film. And once they finished it, this film in no way met the standards of the Hays Code. The only time I saw in this film where it met Hays Code standards is the scene where they're at the French house with the girls, and we never see them have any actual like romantic contact with each other. It's literally just like a scene of a shadow of a bed where they're talking to each other.
Yeah.
Um, but everything else, like the blown up hand scene, or even when they're swimming, we see bare naked ass men. Because they decided to do flips in the water. Um, but we see that, and there's just death everywhere, and I was like, man, this had to have been a hard sell to get it out. But apparently Paramount made the big pitch. They're like, nope, we need to do it this way. We believe in it this strongly, and I'm glad that they did that. Because today a lot of films will more or less bend to the will of the MPAA.
Yeah. That's the beauty of art, is when it pushes the norms of society and dares. And I was gonna bring this up earlier, but just Have you ever realized how not maybe not controversial, but racy and R rated movies used to be back in the day, like the 20s? They'd show gore, sex, like all the good stuff, and then the Hays Code had to go and ruin it for everybody.
Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great Hays Code era films, but also because of the Hays Code, you have to think to yourself, you're like, you think, imagine what Sands of Iwo Jima would have been like without the Hays Code. Like, oh my god.
Yeah, holy crap.
But yeah, it's a wonder we got some of the masterpieces that we did during the Hays Code era.
Yep.
Because if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Casablanca also a Hays Code era film?
I'm pretty sure they even had to rewrite Casablanca at one point, or and reshoot a bunch of scenes because it didn't fit. But I again, what do I know, man?
Yeah, not much.
Hey, quiet you.
Oh, so do you think it's that time to give our rating for this film?
I think it's time to give our rating for this film.
What do you think would be a good rating?
5 stolen pigs.
5 stolen pigs.
Yeah, I think it should be on a scale of 1 to 5 stolen pigs, or
Uh,
pancakes,
potato pancakes,
sister kisses.
sister kisses. We'll do sister kisses.
I said that's a joke, but yeah,
Nope, too
okay.
late. We're doing sister kisses for All
Damn it!
Quiet on the Western Front.
God damn it!
It's funny for me because I'm an only child, so
Well, I don't have a sister, but still,
well, that shouldn't bother
man.
you either.
Oh,
We
okay,
get to mock everybody else who does have a sister.
yeah, the weirdos. I don't know why you'd choose that,
We
but
finally
at
get
any
we
rate,
finally get to be the ones that are like, haha, your sister.
I give this film 5 out of 5 sister kisses.
That is a strong rating. What is your basis for 5 sister kisses?
Because, well, to I wanted to say this earlier, to call this a classic, I don't feel like that's doing enough justice, but this is a timeless classic. It's the anti-war film, or at least up there in anti-war films. It's aged remarkably well, except for, the occasional line of dialogue and maybe kissing your mother and sister on the lips, but still.
Right.
And like, the Nazis banned this movie in Germany, and they would like raid movie theaters that were airing it and like throw stink bombs and like shit at the screens when it was airing. And if it's controversial enough for them, I have to love it.
Yeah, if the Nazis hate you, you must be doing something right.
Yeah, and they really hated the author of that, Erich von Remarque, because he was very anti-Nazi and anti-war for some reason.
Yeah, I can also see how they wouldn't be super because they're probably still super sensitive about the fact that Germany went into like a Great Depression immediately after World War I, and like the wounds are still very fresh at that point. So
Absolutely.
I could see where this film would not be a top choice for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see where they would think it would be problematic for the masses. That, yeah,
So for me, I also will give this 5 sister kisses.
out of 5.
Yep, it
Cursed
is.
rating system, but
It's like you said, calling this a classic barely does it justice. It is a fantastic film. It really pushed the boundaries of what a film was at that time. There were so many different artistic choices in this that really was a big risk for them, and I'm glad they took it. Like, for example, something we didn't discuss was this film has no soundtrack to it.
nope.
Um, Zero. The only time you hear any music is when the soldiers are singing. But other than that, there's no orchestral anything, nothing of that nature. And when it was released in theaters, a lot of theaters provided their own music because they're like, something's missing here. And for the studio to make such a deliberate choice like that, it's a big risk for them because, to have something that every other film has at that time and purposely leave it out, like that's an artistic choice, and I appreciate those kind of decisions. I also appreciate the decisions for them to take input from actual veterans. Um, and the fact that this is a faithful adaptation of the book really speaks volumes because I mean there is untold number of movies that are adaptations from books that just don't do the books any justice whatsoever. So for those reasons, I give it the 5 out of 5. I think now that I've seen each variant of All Quiet on the Western Front, this isn't my favorite version of All Quiet on the Western Front, but I think it is the best version of it.
Hmm. Which version do you think is best? Well,
I
do,
per
do you prefer?
So like I said, I think this is the best variant. My personal favorite is the most recent Netflix adaptation of it. Because the Netflix adaptation of All Quiet on the Western Front, it's it's like we've discussed in the past. It is a inspired by type film. It shares characters, shares motifs, and it has a couple of scenes or a couple of like specific things that carry over from the original work, but it is very much kind of its own story. So, although I love the Netflix adaptation, I think that this version is the best version.
I gotta go with this version for being my go-to version.
So, what did the fine folks at Rotten Tomatoes give it?
I'm glad you asked. The critics, it's sitting at a 98%, and the audience is an 89%.
Hmm.
Got to go with the critics on this one.
It's not often that we choose the critics over the audience score,
Yeah, it's rare.
but I'm glad that even between the audience and the critics score, I'm glad this film got what it got. It's
Mm-hmm.
more than deserving of it, and it's if you are a film fan, like if I was to come up, like, have you ever seen those like Etsy ads where it's like, here's a poster where you can scratch off like a top 100 films of all time bucket list type deal. If I was to make a Etsy scratch off top 100 films of all time, All Quiet on the Western Front would be like in the top 10.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely one of the best anti-war movies ever made.
Absolutely. And, I love the fact that this film didn't hold back even by like, the 1930s golly G Willikers standard.
Yeah,
So you chose this film, right?
I did.
So that means that next week is my choice.
Yep.
So here's the thing. We have yet to do an airplane movie, which I've previously stated that two of my favorite types of films are submarine and airplane movies. But we have also not done a John Wayne film. So
Why's that,
I
Pilgrim?
I don't know, it just hasn't
Sorry,
come up yet.
had to.
So before I make my choice, I'm going to let you narrow it down. You tell me, airplane or John Wayne movie?
Airplane.
Well, I'm glad you asked because we are going to watch. Hold up,
You have to look at. Did you think I was gonna pick John Wayne?
I don't know. Maybe I'm. Here's the thing.
He's a
Yeah,
racist.
yeah. Everybody
Was.
from the '40s was.
Yeah, but he was racist even by then standards.
Yes, I know he had his issues, but can we agree that he has made some great films?
Yeah.
Oh god, where the fuck is this film? Okay, I'm glad you asked, Jack, because we're going to be watching 1942's Flying Tigers starring John Wayne.
Ooh.
Suck it.
Got me. Man, yeah, you sure showed me with that movie choice. What's it
I know.
about?
Seriously?
Don't say it like that, asshole. Now I feel
What?
like I'm put on the spot.
Okay, so the Flying Tigers, the movie is about the famous fighter squadron called the Flying Tigers. They were a group of American volunteers who, prior to America entering World War II, we had a strict non-intervention policy. So there was a group of pilots from America who broke neutrality laws, went over to China, and formed a fighter squadron to help in the Chinese defense against the Japanese.
Huh, I did not know that.
Quite an interesting story, honestly.
Well, I hope to learn more about it in our next film.
Would you like to know more?
Would you like to know? That was weeks ago.
Still a good movie. By the way, I would like to say I'm very proud of the fact that on our Instagram page, um, when I was just doing stuff, so we follow Casper Van Dien, who was the actor for Johnny Rico from Starship Troopers. When I was on our Instagram page, I saw he made some sort of post about Starship Troopers, and I just commented, I'm like, "Oh, we reviewed that film recently and we loved it." And then he liked our comment, so go us.
Yay! We're
We got no,
famous now.
we got noticed.
Hooray! Yeah, that's. I think that's all I got for this week.
Okay then. So, if you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review. The stars do matter. As I mentioned, we do have an Instagram page. We also have a Facebook page. So, go to either one of those, give us a follow, like, what have you, uh, to catch whatever updates. If you are a YouTube person, our stuff can be found under the History Apprentice YouTube channel. Give that a subscribe or whatnot. And I believe that is it. So it is nice being with all of you. Thanks for joining us. I've been John,
And I'm Jack.
and we will catch you next time.
Bye.